The moment you feel the need to explain yourself, something has already shifted against you. Not outside, inside. Picture the situation. A subtle accusation lands, a question that is not really a question, a look that suggests doubt, a comment that reframes your action as careless, selfish, or incompetent. Nothing explodes. No voices rise. But inside your body, everything tightens. Your chest compresses, your throat dries, your thoughts scatter, desperately searching for words, context, proof, anything that might restore balance. You feel an almost uncontrollable urge to speak, to clarify, to fix the misunderstanding. And in that exact moment, before a single word leaves your mouth, the hierarchy is already set. Power does not shift when you speak. It shifts the moment you feel compelled to. Most people miss this. They believe the danger lies in saying the wrong thing. It doesn't. The danger lies in the fact that you believe you must say something at all. That internal pressure is the signal. It marks a lower position. Explanation is not communication. It is positioning. Modern culture teaches you that explaining yourself is maturity, that it signals emotional intelligence, fairness, and growth. This is a comforting lie. Explanation is not neutral. It is a positional move. When you explain, you are not exchanging information. You are responding to an implied judgment. You are silently saying, "You have the authority to evaluate me." That is not communication between equals. That is submission to a frame. Look closely at equal power dynamics. When two people of equal standing disagree, they do not rush to justify themselves. They state positions, set boundaries, and move on. Only the person who feels evaluated begins to explain. Explanation belongs to those who believe they are being assessed, and that failing the assessment carries consequences. That belief is what grants the other person leverage. Every time you explain yourself, you step into a courtroom you did not build. There is a judge, a defendant, and an unspoken charge. The moment you clarify, you accept your role. You may think you are adding context, but you are validating the trial itself. You are agreeing that there is something to defend, something to prove, and someone with the right to decide. Once that structure exists, the outcome no longer matters. The loss has already occurred. This is why explanations so often fail, even when they are calm, logical, and true. The conflict was never about truth. It was about position. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology gave it language. He never believed power belonged to the most virtuous or the most accurate. He observed something far more uncomfortable. Power belongs to the one who controls the frame. Whoever defines what is being discussed, why it matters, and who must respond controls the outcome. Truth becomes irrelevant once the frame is set. When you explain yourself, you are not defending truth. You are entering someone else's reality. You allow them to define the problem, the standards, and the meaning of your behavior. In Machiavellian terms, this is fatal, because once you accept another person's frame, you can only lose within it. Here is the part most people resist. The more you explain, the weaker you appear. Not because your explanation is flawed, but because explanation reveals instability. Your voice subtly changes, your pacing shifts, your energy moves outward, seeking validation. Humans read this instantly at a biological level. They may consciously agree with you, but unconsciously they register something else. You are trying to regain balance. Anyone trying to regain balance is not in control. This is why aggressors often escalate when you explain. They sense leverage. They sense that your internal stability depends on their agreement, so they press again and again. The attacker does not gain power from being right. They gain power from your reaction. Every explanation rewards the initial attack. It teaches the other person that questioning you works, that you can be pulled into defense, that you will expend energy to restore alignment. Even if they lose the argument, they win the dynamic. They learn that you are reactive, and reactivity is exploitable. This is why many conflicts feel endless, not because the issue remains unresolved, but because the roles are fixed. One attacks, one explains. As long as that structure holds, the content is irrelevant. Society senses this long before it names it. Humans evolved to detect weakness quickly, not moral weakness or intellectual weakness, but nervous system instability, hesitation, over-clarification, defensive detail. These are ancient signals. Long before language, they meant uncertainty, lack of grounding, pushability. Modern society may be more polite, but it is no less primal. People still sense it and respond to it, then rationalize their response afterward. This is why someone can explain themselves perfectly and still lose respect. The loss did not come from the explanation itself. It came from the need to explain. Here is the cold truth most people avoid. You do not lose power when someone misunderstands you. You lose power when you panic about being misunderstood. Misunderstanding is neutral. Panic is not. Panic signals dependence. Dependence establishes hierarchy. And hierarchy, once formed, does not need words to sustain it. Let this land clearly. You don't lose power when you're misunderstood. You lose it when you rush to correct it. The moment you explain, you step out of your own reality and into someone else's. In the next part, we go deeper, past behavior and into biology, because the urge to explain is not a habit. It is a program, and until you understand where that program came from, it will continue to run your life without your permission. Why your brain betrays you. The childhood program. If you think the urge to explain comes from weakness, you are wrong. It comes from training. Long before you learned strategy, status, or power, your nervous system learned one thing very clearly: explanation equals survival. To understand this, you have to go back, not intellectually, but emotionally, to childhood. Picture it. You are small. You are dependent. An authority figure stands in front of you. A parent, a teacher, a caregiver. Something has gone wrong. Maybe you broke something. Maybe you were accused unfairly. Maybe you were simply misunderstood. The details don't matter. What matters is the structure. Someone with power asks a question. Why did you do that? What were you thinking? Is this true? In that moment, your safety depends on one thing: your ability to explain. You talk fast. You justify. You give context. You plead your case. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the punishment is softened. Sometimes you are spared entirely, and your nervous system records the lesson with absolute clarity. When authority questions you, explanation reduces danger. That lesson is not abstract. It is biological. Your brain wires explanation to relief. Cortisol drops when the adult nods. Fear subsides when the authority accepts your story. Over time, this pattern hardens. Authority becomes judge. Judge becomes danger. Explanation becomes safety. This is conditioning, not character. Your brain is not asking whether explaining is wise. It is executing a survival program that once worked perfectly. The problem is not that you learned it. The problem is that you never updated it. Here is the critical shift most people never make. You grew up. Your environment changed. But your nervous system did not get the memo. The brain does not automatically distinguish between a parent and a boss, a teacher and a partner, an authority figure and a stranger online. It responds to perceived evaluation, not actual threat. Anyone who questions you strongly enough can trigger the same childhood circuitry. The question does not need to be fair. The accusation does not need to be real. All that matters is the signal. Someone is judging you, and your body reacts before your mind can intervene. This is why intelligent, capable adults suddenly feel small in certain interactions. This is why confident people crumble under specific types of criticism. This is why you can know, logically, that you owe no explanation and still feel compelled to give one. It is not a choice, it is a reflex. Psychologists call this regression. Under perceived threat, the mind slides backward into an earlier developmental state. The adult disappears. The child takes the wheel. You are no longer responding to the person in front of you. You are responding to an echo of authority from the past. Once you see this, many things become clear. Your boss is not your parent, but your body reacts as if they are. Your partner is not a judge, but your nervous system treats their disappointment like a verdict. A comment from a stranger online carries no real power, yet your chest tightens as if exile were imminent. You are projecting old authority onto new faces. You are reliving old dynamics in new rooms. And every time you explain yourself reflexively, you are not engaging in adult communication. You are reenacting a childhood survival script. This is why telling yourself to just be confident never works. Confidence does not override conditioning. Awareness does. Until you recognize that the urge to explain is a learned response, you will continue to personalize it. You will think, I explained because I'm weak, instead of, I explained because my nervous system detected a threat that no longer exists. That distinction matters. One leads to shame. The other leads to control. This is where the contrast with power becomes sharp. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something that modern culture avoids because it sounds harsh. Those who hold real power do not explain themselves, not because they are cruel, but because they are not dependent. A ruler who explains has already conceded authority. Explanation only exists where permission is required. The child explains because the parent can punish. The subject explains because the ruler can decide their fate. The sovereign does not explain because there is no higher authority in the room. This is not about arrogance, it is about structure. The child lives downstream of authority. The sovereign sits upstream of consequence. One must justify, the other defines. When you explain yourself unnecessarily as an adult, you are temporarily stepping back into the child's position. You are behaving as if the person in front of you has the power to grant or withdraw safety. Most of the time, this is an illusion. But the body does not care. It reacts anyway. Understanding this reframes everything. Your habit of explaining is not a moral flaw. It is not a lack of confidence. It is not stupidity. It is outdated software. Software that once kept you safe and now quietly costs you power. And like all outdated software, it runs automatically until you interrupt it. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Many people prefer to believe they are weak rather than admit they are programmed. Weakness feels personal and therefore familiar. Programming implies responsibility, because once you see the code, you are accountable for whether you keep running it. You can no longer say, "That's just who I am." You have to say, "That's what I learned." And what is learned can be unlearned. This is also why power dynamics feel so confusing to adults who have never examined their childhood conditioning. They think conflicts are about logic, fairness, or personality. They are not. They are about whose nervous system stays regulated and whose collapses into explanation. The moment one person feels they must justify themselves, the hierarchy tilts, not because the other person is superior, but because the program has been activated. Let this settle. You did not fail because you explained. You explained because, at a deeper level, your body believed it was unsafe not to. That belief was once correct, it is no longer. And until you update it, you will keep handing power to people who never earned it. This is the pivot point, the realization that changes the game. You are not broken, you are trained, and training can be reversed. But reversal does not begin with tactics, it begins with recognition. The next time the urge to explain rises, you are not facing a real threat, you are facing a memory. And memories do not deserve obedience. Here is the blade that cuts through the illusion, and it needs to land cleanly. You grew up. Your nervous system didn't. Until you bring those two back into alignment, you will keep reacting like a child in rooms where only adults are playing. In the next part, we move from the inner mechanism to the outer battlefield, because once you understand the program, the next question becomes decisive. Who controls the frame, controls the outcome. Frames decide everything. Judge versus defendant. Every conflict you have ever been in follows the same hidden architecture, whether you noticed it or not. Two roles appear immediately. One person asks, the other answers. One defines the issue, the other reacts to it. One stands above the interaction, the other steps below it. This is not about intelligence or morality, it is about structure. The one who asks the question occupies the higher position. The one who answers has already accepted a lower one. Most people miss this because they focus on content. They argue facts, tone, intent, and fairness. Meanwhile, the real battle is being decided silently, before words even matter. The moment someone asks you to justify yourself, a frame is being proposed. It may look innocent, it may even sound polite, but structurally, it places you in the role of defendant. And the moment you begin answering, you are no longer choosing freely. You are responding inside a system that was not designed by you. The questioner has already defined what matters. They have already implied that something is wrong. Your response, no matter how calm or reasonable, confirms the legitimacy of that implication. You are no longer standing on neutral ground. You are standing in their courtroom. This is why just explaining clearly so often fails, because by answering, you are not clarifying reality. You are ratifying the frame. You are saying, yes, this question deserves an answer. Yes, you have the right to ask it. Yes, I accept this structure. Once that happens, the content becomes secondary. You can win the argument and still lose the position. You can be factually correct and still walk away diminished. The hierarchy was decided the moment you accepted the role. Understanding this is the first step towards seeing conflict from above instead of inside it. Most people experience conflict emotionally as participants. They feel attacked, misunderstood, pressured. They respond from inside the frame. But the moment you step back and observe the structure, something changes. You realize the real question is not, what should I say? But, why am I answering at all? That shift alone elevates you. It moves you from reflex to awareness. Frames work because humans are deeply conditioned to respect questions. Questions feel neutral. They feel rational. They feel fair. But questions are not neutral. A question always contains assumptions. It presupposes a problem. It implies authority. When someone asks, why did you do that? They are not merely seeking information. They are asserting that your action requires justification. When you answer, you confirm that assertion. You accept that your behavior exists under their evaluation. That is how power quietly transfers hands. This is why skilled interrogators, manipulators, and high-status individuals rely heavily on questions. Questions allow them to dominate without appearing aggressive. They never need to state accusations directly. The frame does the work for them. The more you answer, the more solid the frame becomes. Eventually, you are no longer talking about what happened. You are talking about who you are. And once identity enters the frame, escape becomes difficult. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this dynamic long before it was formalized by psychology or sociology. He warned rulers never to fight on ground chosen by their enemies. To accept another's frame was to concede before the battle began. His advice was simple and brutal. Never argue inside a structure that positions you as subordinate. Either change the frame entirely or refuse the engagement altogether. Anything else is theater, not strategy. Changing the frame does not require aggression. It requires awareness. You can do it by refusing to answer the question as asked. You can do it by asking a question in return that shifts focus. You can do it by redefining what is actually relevant. And sometimes, the most powerful move is to disengage completely. Silence, in this context, is not avoidance. It is a refusal to validate a structure designed to diminish you. Machiavelli knew that walking away from a bad frame preserved power far more effectively than winning inside it. Look at how this plays out in modern life. In the workplace, the employee who is constantly asked to explain decisions is not necessarily incompetent. They are simply positioned as someone who can be tested. Each explanation reinforces that role. Meanwhile, the person who states decisions without justification is rarely questioned, even if their reasoning is no better. In relationships, one partner often becomes the perpetual defendant, explaining tone, intent, and feelings, while the other occupies the role of judge. Over time, resentment grows, not because of disagreement, but because of structural imbalance. On social media, strangers ask questions that masquerade as curiosity, but function as traps. Those who respond defensively feed the frame and invite escalation. Those who do not are often left alone. Patterns emerge quickly once you start looking at structure instead of surface. Who is always asked to clarify? Who is always on the defensive? Who is constantly being held accountable? These are not accidents. They are signs of frame control. The person who must answer is the person being evaluated. The person who evaluates does not need to explain themselves. That asymmetry defines the interaction long before content matters. This is why some people seem untouchable. They are not necessarily smarter or stronger. They simply do not accept frames that place them below others. They do not answer questions that should never have been asked. They do not rush to justify themselves. They either redirect the interaction or remove themselves from it entirely. From the outside, this looks like confidence. In reality, it is structural awareness. Once you see this, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice how often you are invited into roles that do not serve you. You notice how often your instinct is to cooperate with frames that weaken you, and you realize that most losses are not dramatic. They are incremental. They happen one explanation at a time. Here is the central truth of this part, and it must be stated without softness. The one answering is already losing, not because answering is immoral or foolish, but because answering confirms a hierarchy that did not need to exist. Power does not always announce itself with force. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a reasonable question. If you answer without awareness, you accept the disguise as reality. The goal is not to become silent or hostile by default. The goal is to recognize when a frame is being imposed and decide consciously whether to accept it. That decision alone restores agency. It moves you out of reflex and into strategy. It allows you to choose when engagement is worth it and when it is not. In the next part, we will address the question that naturally arises here. If refusing to answer breaks the frame, What does silence actually mean? Is it weakness, avoidance, or something else entirely? Because once you understand frames, silence stops looking passive. It starts looking like one of the most precise tools of power available. Silence as weapon. Why manipulators panic? Silence has been misunderstood for as long as humans have been talking. Most people associate silence with weakness, avoidance, or fear. They think that if you do not respond, you are losing. That belief is not accidental. It was taught to you. Silence feels dangerous because you were trained to believe that cooperation is safety and non-response is punishment. But silence, when chosen consciously, is not retreat. It is refusal. It is the decision to not participate in a script designed to pull you into a lower position. Silence is not doing nothing. Silence is not cooperating with the game. Manipulators understand this instinctively. That is why they fear silence more than insults, anger, or logic. Insults invite defense. Anger invites reaction. Logic invites debate. All three keep the game alive. Silence kills it. When you remain silent, you are not withholding words. You are withholding validation. You are refusing to confirm that the attack deserves energy. To understand why silence works, you must understand how the human brain handles tension. The brain is not built to tolerate unresolved situations. It hates uncertainty. It hates open loops. Silence creates both. When someone attacks you verbally, their nervous system expects resistance. They are pushing. Pushing only makes sense if something pushes back. When nothing happens, the brain experiences a vacuum. Silence becomes an empty space that the attacker's mind rushes to fill. They replay their words. They question their tone. They wonder if they went too far or not far enough. They feel exposed. This is not a moral reaction. It is neurological. Silence removes the reference point that the attacker needs. Without your response, they cannot locate themselves in the interaction. The brain searches for feedback to regulate behavior. When feedback does not arrive, anxiety rises. This is why people often begin to talk more when you stay silent. They clarify, they soften, they contradict themselves. They try to repair a rupture you never acknowledged. Silence forces the other person to confront their own energy without distraction. This is the psychological mechanism that makes silence so powerful. It turns the spotlight inward. The attacker expects you to carry the discomfort. Silence hands it back to them. You are no longer managing their emotions. They are forced to manage their own. And most people are very bad at that. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this long before neuroscience could explain it. He knew that the one who reacts loses tempo. Reaction is surrendering the rhythm of the exchange. It hands initiative to the other side. Power, in his view, belonged to those who could remain unmoved while others exhausted themselves. This is why he warned against emotional response, not because emotion is weak, but because reaction reveals dependence. If you must react, it means something outside you controls your state. Think of the difference between water and stone. Stone resists. Water absorbs and flows around force. When you strike stone, you feel impact. When you strike water, your force disappears. Silence operates like water. It does not confront the attack head-on. It lets it pass through. The attacker expects friction. Silence offers none. And without friction, their aggression collapses under its own weight. This is why manipulators panic when silence appears. Manipulation relies on predictable reactions. It depends on pulling emotional strings and watching you move. Silence cuts the strings. Suddenly, the manipulator cannot read you. They cannot tell if they are winning or losing. This uncertainty is intolerable to someone who thrives on control. so they begin to defend themselves. They ask follow-up questions. They soften accusations. They shift tone. The power dynamic flips without you saying a word. Silence also sends a powerful status signal. Humans constantly scan for cues about hierarchy. Who reacts quickly? Who explains? Who fills space? These behaviors are unconsciously associated with lower status. High-status individuals do not rush. They do not scramble to be understood. They do not over-communicate. Silence signals self-sufficiency. It suggests that your internal state is stable regardless of external pressure. That stability reads as authority. People may not like it, but they respect it. This is why silence often makes the other person defensive. They feel judged, even though you said nothing. They begin to justify themselves. They start explaining their intentions. Ironically, they step into the very role they were trying to force you into. The silence becomes a mirror, and what they see reflected back is their own aggression. That reflection is uncomfortable, so they try to escape it by talking. Every word they add weakens their position and strengthens yours. It is important to be precise here. Silence is not passive aggression. It is not sulking. It is not withdrawal. Passive-aggressive silence is loaded with emotion. It seeks a reaction. Strategic silence seeks nothing. It is calm, neutral, and grounded. It does not perform. It does not punish. It simply refuses to participate. The difference is internal, and people can feel it. Most people are afraid of silence because silence exposes their dependency. When you stay silent, you must face your own urge to fix, to smooth, to be liked. That urge is uncomfortable, but that discomfort is exactly where power is reclaimed. Silence forces you to tolerate misunderstanding without collapsing. It trains your nervous system to remain regulated, even when approval is withheld. Over time, this changes how others treat you. They stop testing. They stop pushing. They sense that their usual tools no longer work. Silence also creates scarcity. Words are abundant. Reactions are cheap. Silence is rare, and rarity signals value. When you speak less, your words carry more weight. When you do not react immediately, your responses feel deliberate. People begin to wait for you instead of pulling you toward them. The rhythm changes, and rhythm, more than volume, determines dominance. This is why silence is often misinterpreted as arrogance. It is not arrogance. Arrogance needs to be seen. Silence does not. Silence is self-contained. It does not need validation to exist. And that independence is unsettling to people who rely on external confirmation. They feel the imbalance immediately. Here is the critical correction that must be made. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is communication at a higher level. It communicates boundaries without confrontation. It communicates confidence without explanation. It communicates indifference to manipulation without hostility. And because it does all of this without visible effort, it appears effortless. Effortlessness is one of the strongest signals of power the human brain recognizes. This is why silence should not be your default response to everything. It is a tool, not a personality. But when used deliberately, it dismantles weak frames instantly. It tells the other person that their narrative is not the center of reality. It tells them that not every provocation deserves oxygen. And most importantly, it tells your own nervous system that you are no longer obligated to perform for safety. Let the final truth of this part land without resistance. Silence is not absence. It is dominance without effort. It is what remains when you stop feeding games that were never designed for you to win. In the next part, we move to the final layer, because silence alone is not always practical. Sometimes you must speak, And when you do, the question becomes decisive. How do you speak without defending, without lowering yourself, and without giving power away? When you must speak, never defend, always disarm. Silence is powerful, but silence is not always available. There are moments when words are unavoidable. A meeting, a relationship, a public setting, a decision that requires a response. This is where most people lose everything they gained from silence. They speak, but they speak defensively. And defensive speech is often worse than no speech at all. You confirm a frame that places you beneath the other person. That is why speaking incorrectly can be fatal to your authority. Not because you said the wrong thing, but because you said it from the wrong place. The rule is simple, but brutal. When you must speak, you never defend, you disarm. Defense accepts the attack as legitimate. Disarmament makes the attack collapse under its own weight. Defense pushes back. Disarmament absorbs and redirects. One keeps the fight alive. The other ends it quietly. The first tool is what psychologists sometimes call agree and amplify. The principle is counterintuitive, which is why it works. An accusation is a hook. It is designed to pull you into resistance. When you resist, you validate the hook. You signal that the accusation has power. Agree and amplify does the opposite. You accept the statement on the surface, then exaggerate it until it loses seriousness. This breaks the frame instantly. The attacker expects friction. You offer none. Imagine someone says, "You only care about money." The defensive response explains motives, context, morality. Predictable, weak. The disarming response sounds like this. Absolutely. It's practically a personality flaw. I should probably get help for it, said calmly, without sarcasm, without anger. What just happened? You refused the insult. You showed zero insecurity around the label. You took control of tone and meaning. The attack has nowhere to land. This works because insults only function when they touch a wound. When you amplify without shame, you demonstrate that there is no wound. The other person feels foolish for trying. Their emotional investment is suddenly exposed. The frame collapses because you did not fight inside it. You stepped above it and rendered it absurd. This is not joking to entertain. It is neutralizing threat through over-acceptance. The second tool is more subtle and even more powerful: fact without identity. Most attacks try to fuse behavior with character. You made a mistake becomes you are incompetent. You were late becomes you don't care. Insecure people fight this fusion desperately. They explain, they argue, they deny. Secure people separate fact from identity effortlessly. They acknowledge what happened and refuse the label. You're right, the report has errors. I'll fix it. Full stop. Notice what was not addressed. The insult. The identity claim. It was ignored. Only the fact was handled. This is devastating to an attacker because it removes their leverage. You show competence by taking responsibility and confidence by not defending your worth. Insecure people cannot do this. They cling to image because image is all they have. Secure people let facts pass through them because their identity is not under negotiation. This is why admitting mistakes calmly raises status instead of lowering it. It signals that your sense of self does not depend on perfection. The contrast is stark. The insecure person hears an accusation and thinks, if this is true, I am nothing. The secure person hears the same accusation and thinks, this does not define me. So they correct what is real and discard the rest. Power always follows the second posture. The third tool is question reversal. Questions are rarely neutral. As you learned in the previous part, Questions often place you in the defendant's seat. Answering them without awareness locks you into a lower position. Question reversal breaks this dynamic by shifting attention back to the questioner. This does not mean being aggressive or hostile. It means refusing to accept the premise of the question. The defensive response explains traffic, workload, circumstances. The disarming response sounds like this: "Why does my arrival time affect you so strongly?" The frame just shifted. We are no longer discussing the clock. We are discussing their emotional reaction. Psychologically, this move is powerful because it forces self-awareness. The attacker expected compliance. Instead, they are being observed. They feel exposed. They may respond with irritation, confusion, or defensiveness. All of these reactions reveal something important. They were invested in controlling the interaction. You have removed that control without confrontation. Question reversal works because it elevates you into the role of examiner. You are no longer trying to pass judgment. You are analyzing behavior. This reverses hierarchy instantly. Used sparingly and calmly, it communicates that you are not available for interrogation. You are not on trial. And you do not need to announce that. The structure does the speaking for you. All of these tools share a single principle. They do not push back against force. They remove the reason for force to exist. Defense feeds conflict. Disarmament starves it. Defense argues inside the frame. Disarmament invalidates the frame entirely. This is why these techniques feel unsettling to people who rely on dominance through pressure. Their usual tactics stop working. They feel off balance. They often retreat. There is an important warning here. None of this works if your nervous system is still begging for approval. If your voice shakes, if your eyes search for reassurance, if your energy screams, "Please understand me," the techniques will fail. Words are only 20% of the signal. The rest is posture, pacing, presence. Disarmament is not a script, it is a stance. You must be willing to let misunderstanding exist without correcting it. You must be willing to let people think poorly of you without chasing their approval. That is the real work. This is why the ultimate defense is not verbal. It is internal. If someone calls you selfish and it devastates you, no technique will save you. But if you have already accepted that you are capable of selfishness, the word loses its sting. If someone calls you incompetent and it shakes you, you will explain. If you know your competence deeply, you will not. Attacks only land where there is internal doubt. Disarmament begins with self-knowledge. This brings the entire series to its final edge. Power is not about dominating others. It is about no longer being dominated by your own need to be validated. Once that need dies, most attacks become irrelevant. You stop defending because there is nothing to defend. You stop explaining because there is nothing to prove. You speak when necessary, not to convince, but to close loops cleanly. Let the final blade cut without hesitation. Never explain who you are. People who matter already know. People who don't never will. This is not bitterness. It is clarity. You are not here to manage perceptions endlessly. You are here to act, decide, and move forward. If this series resonated, you already understand what to do next. Not because you were told, but because you recognize the position. Those who are ready do not need persuasion. They need alignment. Stay aligned. Stay minimal. Stay unprovoked.